In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to use a CSS 12-column grid system to set the layout of a web page. So here I'm using this really basic web page that we have just really content and structure added to it. And I've set up the CSS for a grid system, a 12-column grid system. And now I want to be able to get the layout that I have. So here I have a header that I want to cover all 12 columns. If I'm using something that goes all 12 columns, I don't need a row. So I can just leave my header section. This is my header section that contains the nav. I can just leave it without specifying any details about it because it's going to span the entire web page, which is what it does by default. So by default, it has that width of 100%. So I'm not going to make any change there. But now where I'm going to change is right here, my main and my aside. I want them to be next to each other. And so I'm going to create a row here that puts my main on one side and my aside on the other. And I want my main to take up 9 columns and my aside to take up 3 columns. Whenever you're doing this, whenever you create a row, you want the row to add up to 12. And so I'm going to divide that by 9 in my main and 3 on the aside. Okay, so the way that I'm going to do this then is I'm going to go in my main section and I'm going to set up a row. So up here, I'm going to create a div, and this is just going to be a container to be the row. So I'm going to set the class equal to row, and then I'm going to come down, and remember that I'm going to have, in my layout, I'm going to have my main section and my aside in this row. So I'm going to come all the way past my main section. There's where my main section ends, and the aside begins. I'm going to keep going till I'm all the way at the end of the aside. And that's where I'm going to end the div. All right, and that's going to give me that row. And then inside the row, I'm going to specify how many columns. So I've got the main section, and I'm going to set the class on this equal to, and here I'm going to use my grid system. I want something that's 9 columns wide. And so I'm going to use this value for my class, column-9. And then on the aside section, I'm going to do the same thing, but the aside section, I want it to be, I'm going to set the class equal to column-3, which has also been specified in the grid system for column-3. So I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to come back in here and refresh, and there I have 9 columns that have the main section and 3 columns where the aside is. Okay, so to get an idea of where these are all lining up, let's go ahead and add some borders around different areas in it. So I'm going to go ahead and add in my header. So this is my header element, and that's an HTML element, and I can just simply say I want the border to be solid and 2 pixels, and I'm just going to do it red. Notice I'm just doing this to test out. This is not something I would set for CSS. I would be using my colors from whatever my color scheme is here if I was going to do that, but I want to test the header. I want to see what the main is, so I'll go ahead and make it blue, and I want to see where my aside is, so I'll make it green. And I want to see where the footer is. And this should outline everything for us. And because we have the box sizing, this won't take up any extra space because it'll be contained within that width and height that they are. What's one more color? Yellow. There aren't too many colors that you can use the word names for. Okay, let's go ahead and refresh. And there that shows us where the header is. There's the main section. There's the aside section and the footer section. Notice that the footer section, we didn't set up a row, so it covers the full width. Same with the header, covers the full width. Whereas the main covers 9 columns and the side covers 3, adding up for the total of 12 columns, so it spans the whole page. Notice if I go down, I say I only want the main to cover 8 columns, and I refresh. And then notice I have one whole column that I haven't used. So you want to make sure that your layout, to keep it nice and sharp, you want to make sure that your layout always, every row spans 12 columns. So however you divide that up, you want to make sure it spans 12 columns. One thing that is interesting about having a grid system set up where you have columns is that as you expand the page or minimize the page, as you make it go smaller or bigger, each section in the row takes up its allowed percentage. So no matter how big my columns get, the main section is going to take up 9 columns and the aside section going to take up 3 of them. So this allows it to change as the website changes, as the browser window changes. Notice that we're creating a problem here though. We have this image that's spilling outside of it. So it fits really nicely when we're up here. Then that image fits nicely and all these images fit nicely. But if I downsize the window, I start getting the images to spill over outside. And in fact, I can go small enough that all of these kind of spill out of it. So one way we can deal with that is we can say that we don't want our images to, our images, we're going to set a max width. So we don't want to specify how big they are normally, but we're going to say never ever get bigger than this. So the maximum width is going to be 94%. So it's like, okay, you can get pretty big, you can fill up your space most of the way, but never spill out. So if I set that, now watch what happens to these images as I refresh, and those images now will only take up at most 90% of their container. Okay, let's see if we can go all the way to 100% and get those all to stay in place. And there we go. And there we've maximized our images, but it's contained them so that they're not spilling out as we resize.